are these people?
With weaponizing sympathy. You're wondering, Collin, what that might mean. Well,
no, I know what that means, but
yes, it gets more than that. So, Caitlin Johnstone, one of our favorites here, writes, Israel weaponizes sympathy and victimhood. We've seen it quite often, especially on Twitter. In this dynamic, anything Israel does causes more people to hate Israel. And you wonder why that might be, Collin. You wonder why they might be doing that. So, she writes, in this dynamic, anything Israel does causes more people to hate Israel, both in the Middle East and around the world, to which Israel responds by tearfully proclaiming, see, they hate us. We must defend ourselves against their hostilities. There's a certain particularly toxic personality type which thrives on being hated. They behave in wildly odious and destructive ways, and then when people react to this with hostility, they plunge into poor me victimhood, which they then use to justify more odious and destructive behavior. You may have been unfortunate enough to have encountered such personalities in your own life. They behave atrociously, and then when people react to it, they say, see, I really am being persecuted. Hillary Clinton is a perfect example of this personality type taken to the extreme. People hate her because she's a phony, egomaniacal sadist who has spent her entire political career pushing for mass military bloodshed at every opportunity, but she then frames this hatred as evidence of widespread misogyny and far-right extremism, which is why the world desperately needs Hillary Clinton to fight those things. Any remotely normal person who was both as wealthy and as despised as Clinton would have simply retired from public life to enjoy their hundreds of millions of dollars, blissfully sheltered from the vitriol and condemnation of the common riffraff. But Clinton keeps showing up, adamantly refusing to go away, because the hatred she receives is actually what fuels her entire political dynamic. You want to see some of that hatred, Care Bear?
Sure.
Let's do it.
War criminal, the people of Libya, the people of Iraq, the people of Syria, the people of Yemen, and the people now of Palestine, as well as the people of America, will never forgive me. I received a human theological seminary.
I'm asking you to leave the delegate and allow us to you out of the
Hell! You will burn!
Can you? Sir. Let's go. Thank you so much.
Sir, thank you for giving us...
Free Palestine! Free! Free Palestine! Free! Free Palestine! Free! Free Palestine!
Look at that. Look at that face right there. Look at that one. That's... Oh, God. Oh,
you didn't know what to
God.
do.
No. No.
Oh, my God! Wow!
Very funny. So, but anyway, I love the, like, you will burn statement. That really hit home, too, I think. You're a war criminal. Yes, you are. We see a large-scale version of this same dynamic with the state of Israel. A Jewish anti-Zionist Israeli named Alan Mizrahi posted an interesting piece on Twitter, which I have this article linked in the description below. His tweet is an article in and of itself. I do suggest reading it. It'll be linked in blue right there in that article for you to go click. So please go do so. A few days ago, that's been rattling around in Caitlin's head ever since, wherein he argues that Israel is actually intentionally generating hatred towards itself in order to shore up political power, claiming that Israel and American Jewish organizations took it upon themselves to keep Jews afraid and isolated in a strategy of intentional paranoia. Mizrahi opines that when October 7th hit, the right-wing, nationalistic, paranoid section of the Jewish political spectrum realized it could be translated into political gold. It doesn't seem like Israel is trying to be hated globally. It is actually what it's doing. Mizrahi writes, it is intentionally airing its cruelty and barbarity so that it will remain closed up to the world. thus guaranteeing the continued rule of the paranoia camp. Palestinians are just crash test dummies in this scenario, he adds. Their deaths are used to get people angry and Israel hated, so it becomes even more paranoid. Whether you accept or reject Mizrahi's perspective, you can't deny that Israel's apologists have been seizing on the outrage its actions in Gaza have caused as evidence of anti-Semitic persecution. The ADL has started categorizing pro-Palestine rallies as what? Anti-Semitic incidents.
Anti-Semitic.
Antiseptic. Yep, including rallies organized and attended by Jewish groups, leading to the Israeli-friendly mass media reporting to a massive spike in anti-Semitism in the wake of October 7th. Common pro-Palestine chants like "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free" have been deceitfully labeled calls for the genocide of Jews, and any criticism of Israel's actions is met with a deluge of accusations of anti-Semitisms. Yeah. So, in this dynamic, anything Israel does cause more people to hate Israel, both in the Middle East and around the world, to which Israel responds by tearfully proclaiming, "See, they hate us. We must defend ourselves against their hostilities." This is not the sort of behavior you would expect from someone in your life, and it shouldn't be the sort of behavior we accept from nuclear-armed ethno-states. As with any other widespread dysfunction, the key to dismantling this one is to spread awareness of what it is that Israel is doing. So, Rania Khalek, nuclear-armed Israel at war with premature babies, but want you to believe Israel is the victim. Good job, Rania. Kind of hitting the nail on the head there. This won't happen until enough awareness has spread of what's really going on in here for there to be a movement toward health. A lot of eyes need to open to the unwholesomeness of this manipulative dynamic, both inside and outside of Israel. Luckily, that does appear to be the case. More and more people are recognizing the unwholesomeness of the pro-Israel victimhood narrative, just as you'd eventually recognize the unwholesomeness of someone in your own life who keeps behaving terribly and then playing the victim. It's going to be messy, 2 steps forward, 1 step back slog, but I think we'll find our way out of this mess eventually. Thoughts, Care Bear, before I finish up?
I mean, yeah, it's interesting that Caitlin brings up the idea of there, like a lot of Zionists are Mizrahi is saying that Zionists are purposely playing the victim as a shield to give them power.
Well, and to continue their actions too, right? Where it's like
right, but kind of justify their actions. Which
it's the class.
We've seen this online over the last few months, and like these Zionists that just appear in my thread and like make their statements which are just off the wall, and people call them out on it, and they're like,
"Oh my god, we've seen this on college campuses recently." You know, you'll have pro-Palestine demonstrations, and you'll have this little Jewish American princess come in with her ice spice latte and cry to the security guard that they're wanting to kill all of you. Well, clearly not, or the mass of people would have already done so. So
let me just clarify something I'm sure there are no signs that there might be or whenever at this point. But let me just clarify something for you, mother effers.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we don't hate you per se. We don't hate Jews per se. We hate the ideology that you subscribe to, that you feel that you, for whatever reason from the Bible or whatever, that you are the chosen people, that God has given you this certain land. And by the way, the fact that, and people don't talk about this enough, the fact that the British government was willing to give up Uganda and Kenya as Israel.
And y'all turned it down, by the way. Why'd you do that?
Right. right, should say something to you, but you choose to ignore that history or very ignorant to it. But I digress. But you 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 purposely act this way. Well, you're making the justification that because you're the chosen people, that you're willing to steal land by force for people who lived there for centuries relatively peacefully, in the guise of, oh, this is your chosen land that God has somewhat given to you. And actually, I saw a tweet.
Well, there's a whole bunch of
A writer
dismantling
that I
that.
should have gave. Right, I should have gave to you, but he mentioned the idea. It's very funny that Jews claim they're the chosen people, yet in the Bible, like
Yeah,
God had to f them up several times
multiple times, right?
because of how barbaric and how
Yeah, all
how
those
much against God they were
pillars of
back in.
salt and whatnot.
Right. So
So
like God had to literally slap him upside the head several times in order for them to
mhm,
but even if you look at the Bible, you see how like crazy they were even back
mhm.
then, if you believe in that.
Half of
So
Deuteronomy is telling them what not to do.
right.
So, but yeah, I think it's interesting that this might be purposeful, you know. So Caitlin wants to kind of continue this point. So she writes, if I wanted to increase anti-Semitism, I imagine I'd do lots of really easy stuff, evil stuff, under a Star of David flag while adamantly insisting that my actions are inseparable from the Jewish people and the Jewish faith. I'd kill children by the thousands and commit general atrocities. To really help anti-Semitism spread, I'd do everything I can to make people less vigilant against it. I try very hard to make the warning label of anti-Semitism look ridiculous and meaningless, circulate narratives that anyone who opposes crimes against humanity hates Jews, frame peace marches as hate crimes, brand calls for justice as calls for the genocide of Jews. I'd falsely cry wolf as many times as possible in the most self-evident, absurd ways as I could think of in order to desensitize everyone to alarm bells about the real spread of anti-Jewish hate. And next slide. I suppose I'd also want to research long-standing anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and do everything I can to feed into them. Jews control the media. I'll make sure the media are widely biased in favor of the Star of David flag. Jews control the government. Make sure governments are bending over backwards to facilitate the crimes of the Star of David nation. Child blood sacrifices. Make sure the war crimes perpetrated in the Star of David nation are killing as many kids as possible. And don't forget about no secret tunnels. We got to talk about the secret tunnels in this regard. But I'll do everything I can to make sure the Jews carrying out the atrocities under the Star of David flag make themselves look as inhuman as possible, thereby dehumanizing ordinary Jews in the eyes of the public. They should film themselves doing the most evil things imaginable while laughing and celebrating their deeds, and then share those videos on social media. The more viral content they can create with the horrific acts, the better. These steps would create the perfect environment for very real acts of hatred towards members of the Jewish faith, which I suppose could then be used to drum up to support further atrocities, thereby making the very real anti-Semitism even worse. This would create a self-reinforcing feedback loop of violence and hatred, creating steadily escalating anti-Semitism throughout our society that someday could theoretically lead to something as terrible as history has ever seen. Of course, I would never do such a thing because it would be a terrible evil to inflict upon the Jews of the world. If such a thing happened, it wouldn't be the fault of the Jews, many of whom are amongst the most kind-hearted and upstanding people on earth. It would be the fault of the governments and media outlets who paved the way to such an outcome. Any power structure which created or fed into such a dynamic would be unforgivably depraved and would need to be stopped for the good of humanity. Care Bear, closing thoughts before I get to this.
Well, it's funny. We have a friend of a show who we're not going to say who. to protect them right now.
Yep.
But they mentioned they're in the region right now, and they mentioned to me that there's more dissent happening in Israel right now than there is here.
Be sure.
Surprisingly, you would not know that given how little we've seen it, in the media and otherwise. But they assured me that for what they're seeing right now, that there is dissent among Israelis in regards to what's happening in there as well. So the idea that, and I'm saying this more for Zionists in the West, like, who are basically being like, oh, like, we're being mistreated, or oh, we're being hated and all this kind of stuff. No, your own people hate your guts too.
Right.
Like,
Well,
are you going to call them anti-Semitic? You want to call your own anti-Semitic?
They do.
Because
Michael Rappaport is calling Finkelstein right now self-hating. Yeah. Oh, no, they do all the time. So,
right.
Yeah.
But, that's not going to make it it's going to make it worse for Jews around the world, because you're going to eat each other in order to justify your own actions of what you're doing in Israel, Palestine right now.
It's the emotional Hannibal directive. Yes, that's pretty much what that is. So, in that same vein, here is anti-Zionist Jewish academic Professor Chaim Bresheth, right? And we've talked about ceasefire before, correct, Collin? And some of the issues we might have with the wording. Here he is to explain that in a bit better context. So we'll let him do the talking.
What we want, of course, is not a ceasefire. A ceasefire is nothing, because a ceasefire, it means that the fire will start again. No.
Do you hear that, Care Bear? What did he say?
Not a ceasefire. A ceasefire is nothing, because a ceasefire, it means that the fire will start again.
Means the fire would start again. Okay.
Right.
No, we want the end of the Zionist project and a new Palestine where Jews, Christians, and Muslims can live like they did in Al-Andalus, like they lived in Palestine, like they lived in the Ottoman Empire, like they lived in South Africa, like they lived under the Mughals, like they lived in most of North Africa and the Middle East, without genocide, without anti-Semitism or Islamophobia, without pogroms, without Holocaust. They lived together. And I think that's what we want. And I think that's what we will get. So I think the stakes are very high here. This is not just for Palestine that we're fighting, but we're fighting for a new Middle East, the end of Islamophobia as a policy and as an action by the West, the end of apartheid in Palestine, and for a kind of convivencia, living together like we always did in the Middle East.
So, any questions? I think that sums it up.
But I mean, Nick from RBN said it best that Zionists are probably one of the biggest Karens that we know of right now. Just the victim shaming and like the shaming that they do to others who are trying to promote justice for what's happening in Palestine. It's just really sick, and it's really maddening that there are actually people who think the way that they think, and it's like, can I make any sense of you to understand what you're saying and your actions that implicate that is wrong? And it's just like they're just so brainwashed that, or they just don't care.
Right.
I think it's a mix of both, but just how adamant they are that they're justified in their actions because again, saw a tweet today that I commented on. Now, granted, the tweet that I got was doctored, but the intent of the tweet, the real tweet, didn't change the meaning any more than this guy saying, Ben Freeman on Twitter was just like, oh, Jews have been, Jews are the only people group that have been under genocide multiple times. And
Right.
I'm like,
you sure about that?
right.
Are you sure about that?
Are you sure about that?
Rwanda, for one, would like to have a word.
Half of Africa, like 90% of Africa, would
Basically,
like to have
all
a
of
word.
Africa would like to have a word. With
The Armenians,
so,
like the multiples. I'm just saying, South America.
Like it does concern me because, in a way, because it makes me wonder what these people think of someone like me in terms of, if you really believe this, like what you're saying is that, oh, you for some reason have gone through all of this suffering, like, and then for someone like me, my ancestors and just my community, I would argue has gone through way more,
right?
And still,
right?
Like
the cop's not gonna pull them over for driving black. Like that's not
right.
Well,
they're
not
not
happening.
gonna pull them over for being Jewish,
right?
Yeah. But they will pull me over, as you said, for being black. So it just makes me wonder what they think of someone like me, really, like in terms of my existence, like, because I might say, no, not might, have said, I don't buy into your Zionist ideology of what you say, and I'm going to call you out on it. And you can call me an anti-Semite, and I have already said this on Twitter. Like, I do not receive that.
There's literally posts from Israel where they're like, "Oh, we had a rocket almost hit us, yet they went to go shop at the Dolce and Gabbana store that day and got like a new iPad. And meanwhile, in Gaza, children are starving, like by the thousands." So,
we didn't talk about. We would have talked about this on Wednesday if we went live, but just given
the bombing of
Rafah over the weekend, and like
the UNRWA headquarters being
all I
blown.
saw on my feed over for like 24 hours was like dead bodies and like blood strewn,
dismembered children on the walls.
And like all these Zionists were like, "Oh, we saved 2 hostages," of which they were rescued
already, supposedly
back from December.
Right.
Like, so, so like you're making up these stories to kind of justify your actions for war at the cost of people who are literally losing their lives, due to what you claim is your birthright.
Right.
Doesn't make sense to
me. Yeah, it's craziness. Well, if you're a Zionist and you're triggered right now watching this, leave a comment. Let us know how we upset you. Share this with all your Zionist friends. Tell them how terrible we are. Like, hit the downvote button. I don't care. Anyone else, they can hit the like button. Hit subscribe. Maybe you want to get triggered again. I don't know.